Hi there, Ronnie here, coming at you with a video. I don't usually get stuck into current affairs, but this business with Gary Lineker has me angry. As far as I know, he has been suspended from presenting Match of the Day, which is BBC's flagship football highlight show. Several of his the pundits that come in with their expert analysis of games have all said in solidarity that they won't be appearing either. Now, whether they agree with Gary's view, or whether they just disapprove of how he's been treated and are just, sort of striking in solidarity, if you like, I don't know. Could be both. Could be one or the other. But anyway. The problem I'm having is the extreme double standard and cowardice of the BBC in this. Firstly, let's just deal with Gary Lineker's tweet. Gary Lineker tweeted the following, and I will read it, word for word. In response to the Tories, the Conservative Party's new immigration policy, upon seeing the Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary's announcement, he tweeted this in response. There is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order. The question at the end was based on the fact that he had tweeted a sort of response to Suella Braverman, where he said basically, "Good heavens, this is beyond awful." To which someone else responded to that by saying that he was out of order and added that it was easy to pontificate when it doesn't affect you. And then he made that tweet. And that tweet about the influx and language not dissimilar has had a number of things. Firstly, it's been wrongly reported that he used the word Nazi. As you can see, that he did not use the word Nazi. He didn't call out any individual, he called out a policy. And he was very careful, in my opinion, with his wording with regards to language not dissimilar to Germany in the 30s. Now, he did not state that we were going in the same direction that Germany went in the 30s. He certainly wasn't making comparisons with what is happening now with what happened in Germany in the early 1940s with the concentration camps and the Holocaust. He was, in my opinion, rightly pointing out that some of the language being used, the othering that's happening, the language and tone being employed by the government and by the sort of right-wing media doesn't sound so different from language being used by Hitler and his party during the 1930s about the Jews, or indeed the Daily Mail back in the 1930s about Jewish refugees. What worries me is that this is all being couched in terms of the BBC suspending him for breach of impartiality. There are several problems with this. One, the BBC's rules regarding impartiality is with regards to its news and current affairs coverage, particularly and very specifically its political coverage, that cannot be seen to be biased in favour of one political party or another, or one political ideology or another. Gary Lineker is not paid by the BBC for his political views. He does not host any political shows for the BBC. He is not a political correspondent for the BBC. Nor did he use his platform on the BBC, i.e. Match of the Day, to voice a political viewpoint. We'll come back to that. This was a tweet that he said on his personal Twitter account. I don't know if Gary Lineker has an official BBC Match of the Day Lineker account or not. I don't know. But he said if he does, he certainly didn't use it to send that tweet out. So, as far as I'm concerned, impartiality isn't an issue here because he's not a political commentator. Also, I have to say with regards to his tweet before I move on, whether one agrees or disagrees with his point of view regarding Tory immigration policy, I don't think it can be argued, at least not successfully, that whatever one thinks of his view, whether you think it's spot on or whether you think it's, wrong or misguided or whatever, can we all at least agree that his tweet came from a place of compassion? Now, whether you think that compassion is misplaced or anything else is an argument for another day, but can we all at least agree that his comment came from a place of genuine concern and compassion? And it worries me that we now have a government who are actually saying compassion is not consistent with our views. I mean, we've known this about the Tory party for a long time, but it's terrible to see it so blatant. So I'm very worried about the fact that someone can get sanctioned for showing a modicum of humanity. But then we get to the double standards. Gary Lineker has in the past tweeted about the fact that he was not a fan of Jeremy Corbyn. showing a political bias in doing so. He wasn't sanctioned for that. That was also him using his Twitter platform to make a political comment. He didn't get sanctioned for that. Didn't get reported. He didn't even get a warning or anything. There was no action taken. There was nothing. Andrew Neil, whilst he was at the BBC, often made comments on Twitter about, his own personal feelings on certain government policies or certain policies of the opposition. He didn't get sanctioned. Alan Sugar, Tory peer in the House of Lords. He comments a lot. He's paid by the BBC. Now, some could say, oh, he's not really an employee, he's a freelancer. Well, the same applies to Gary Lineker. He's made comments, political comments. But he's not been sanctioned. The height of the hypocrisy and stupidity happened the other night on Question Time, when the discussion of Boris Johnson and his dad came up. It was stated, and it's a fact, that his wife, Boris Johnson's mum, did suffer at her husband's hands, apparently on multiple occasions. Now, I call that, I would say that was domestic violence, that he was a domestic abuser. And he was called that on Question Time. And Fiona Bruce, who is the chair at Question Time, someone who is there as part of the current affairs and political correspondent and is there to be impartial, has, as she has done countlessly, sided with the government and actually said in a blisteringly stupid comment that it was okay, it only happened once. I don't care what your view on, to me, domestic violence, once is one too many. No sanction for her. But someone else has been sanctioned of a sort. An episode of all people, Sir David Attenborough's new Nature documentary series, is going to be pulled from being broadcast. It will still be available on iPlayer, but it's being pulled from broadcast because it talks about climate change and reforesting and all kinds of things going on. And they were worried that it might upset certain right-wing groups. So not only has Gary Lineker been suspended for voicing the opinion that Tory immigration policy comes across as cruel, and the language being used by the government and the media sounds eerily familiar For anyone who's sort of listened to the rhetoric of the rise of the Socialist Party in Germany in the 1930s. But also you now have one of the most revered documentary makers about nature and our planet having one of his episodes pulled just in case certain elements of the right wing might be offended. And this is the problem with the double standard. If Gary Lineker had tweeted, not in not critical of the new policy, but in favour of it, he would be on Match of the Day tonight. There would have been nothing said. Because the truth is, and it's a sad truth, the sort of right-wing edge, particularly Tory party, has now got itself so far into the BBC that the BBC are afraid to do their jobs. Now, I'm not saying that the politicians on the left wing should be given a free pass by the BBC. No. If a politician comes on a show, I think of, Jeremy Paxman just thundering in on them. It shouldn't matter what party they are. If you have a discussion over a particular policy or news story and you have both sides of a debate, the person in the middle, the broadcaster in the middle, should be thundering in on both of them, arguing both points, showing absolutely no mercy, as far as I'm concerned, to both sides. Not tacitly accepting one side over the other. Or worse, being afraid to challenge one side for fear of sanction. We are slowly but inexorably careering from having a state broadcaster to having a state broadcaster. And that should frighten everyone. Some people have suggested that this might be the Tories' way of trying to defund the BBC. I don't know about that. I'm not going to get the tin hat on for this. Whilst I absolutely feel that the licence fee should never be a compulsion. The licence fees should be an option, not a compulsion. State television should be free. State broadcasting should be free. If people want to pay for it, fair enough. But a state broadcaster should be impartial, should be neutral, should be not taking a position on anything when it comes to politics. But it's not. It really isn't. And that should frighten everyone. And at the moment, it is the right wing that's doing it. And for those wondering, no, I would be equally concerned if it was the left doing it. Because whilst I'll nail my colours to the mast, I would definitely say I lean more left of centre. I certainly don't lean right of centre. I believe that a state broadcaster, and especially its news, current affairs, and political programming, should be completely neutral. Should be dealing with the facts. And when you have a member of parliament or anyone trumpeting a particular policy, political, social policy, regardless of what that policy is, they should be questioned. It should be thoroughly gone into, for two reasons. One, I don't believe that any policy, whether I agree with the policy or not, should get a free pass. It should go through rigorous questioning by newscasters, by reporters, because we, the public, usually don't get a chance to put those questions towards these people. We desperately count on those broadcasters to be our voice, to ask our questions, to give us the information by which we can then make a safe, rational choice as to whether or not we support a particular policy or viewpoint. Regardless of what that policy or viewpoint is. But secondly, as a broadcaster, it should represent the whole of the UK. Now, I will certainly accept that we shouldn't be representing the extremists on any side, and we certainly shouldn't be representing people who are criminal. But, maybe we do that already. But we certainly, there certainly needs to be more diversity and needs to be more consideration given. And when it comes to political and documentaries and investigative, it can't have a bias. It's got to go in on both sides, question rigorously, get the facts out of there. But I mentioned at the start of this about Gary Lineker. He's never used his platform to voice a political opinion. Last year, the World Cup took place in Qatar. I watched absolutely none of it. Now, this is not because I'm not a particular football fan. I can watch football quite happily as a neutral. But what I refused to do was watch the World Cup in Qatar because I didn't agree with the World Cup being held there. Similarly, I didn't watch any of the World Cup that came from Russia in 2018 for the same reason. In both cases because of those nations' human rights abuses. Did my boycott affect them in any way, shape or form? No, but, I have to do what I have to do for me. And I decided I was going to boycott it. But it was interesting. The opening ceremony, which is usually a big thing that gets televised. The opening ceremony, if you watched it on BBC iPlayer, you got the opening ceremony. If you were watching on BBC One, you didn't. You got Gary Lineker and his studio guests talking about the social and political problems in Qatar, questioning whether the World Cup should have been there at all. And should the World Cup be used as a platform to try and affect social change? Now, I didn't watch that debate, that conversation, because I wasn't watching any of it. I only heard about it after the fact. And I don't think you can actually find it on BBC iPlayer. And I haven't really been looking, to be fair. But there was Gary Lineker and several people voicing a political opinion on the BBC. And whilst there were complaints, no action was taken. Why? What is the connective tissue through all of these various examples? Sadly, it's simple. If your political bias is in favour of the current government, the BBC won't do anything. If your political opinion is in opposition, where you voice opposition to those parties not in government, the BBC won't do anything. I make mention of that because Gary Lineker, as I say, has had a few choice words to say about Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party. But if your opinion questions the current government, or you voice an opinion that might upset the government or those allied to the government, you are now looking at sanctions. Funny though, I've been watching this the last couple of days, and I'm finding it hilarious that all the people who have been championing Gary Lineker being taken off the air are the people who constantly talk about cancel culture and attacks on free speech. Hypocrisy, thy name is so many of them. I am finding the world increasingly scary. I'm finding the world increasingly difficult to cope with. And I don't know what the answer is. But whatever the answer is, for me, surely the answer can't be suspending someone, sacking someone, pulling a program of someone simply because they either say something rooted in compassion that happens to object to a policy, or who might make mention of things happening in the world that might upset certain sections of the right-wing media, or right-wing groups? I don't know what the answer is, but it can't be that. It can't be what's going on. As for the BBC, it has to fight back. It really has to fight back. I personally think that the BBC will eventually become a subscription service. If you want it, you pay for it. And if you don't want it, you don't have to pay for it, but you don't get it. I think this will be easier to do as technology advances and the BBC can actually be stopped from going into homes or anything else. It can be fully encrypted. But the BBC has to fight back. The BBC news arm has to fight back. Current affairs have to fight back. We're hearing far too many examples of bias. Now, some people claim there's a left-wing bias at the BBC. Some people claim there's a right-wing bias at the BBC. The problem is no one is claiming that there's no bias at the BBC. And that's a problem. We need an unbiased, forthright news channel. We need unbiased investigative journalists, not just at the BBC, but in print media, newspapers as well. We need this. Western democracy needs this, or we're going to be tiptoed slowly, surely, inexorably towards a situation where we're being educated to think a certain way by the news that we're receiving. I've said this in other videos. Former newscaster Martin Lewis, not the money guy, but newscaster, used worked for ITN and the BBC over his years. He was laughed out for pushing the idea that there should be more positive news items. I wonder if he saw today coming. I wonder if he saw the decline coming. I don't want left-wing journalism. I don't want right-wing journalism. I just want journalism. I want the facts. We need those facts. I don't want bias. I want proper reporting. I want the people who are charged and given power to be held to account properly, and for us not to fear those people. There's a line from V for Vendetta which says people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people, and it's absolutely right. And at the moment, unfortunately, we're far too much of the former and there's not enough of the latter. And when I say government should be afraid of their people, I mean they should be held account By the ballot box, yes, but also by journalists willing, ready. I mean, we already have a situation where certain MPs won't go on to certain shows with certain journalists because they don't want to be given a hard time. You want to be an MP, you want to be a minister, you want to push an agenda. You get ready for a hard time. If you're not ready to face strong questioning, legitimate strong questioning, robust questioning, then the policy you're trying to push ain't worth none. But that's how I feel. I'm just exhausted by it all. I'm exhausted by everything going on right now. It's too much. The world just seems to be a lot darker. And getting darker. And I honestly don't. I used to have hope. I used to be able to say to my friends, you know what? I haven't lost faith in the world yet. That faith is now on a very, very, very thin precipice. And I'm not sure how much more my hope can take.